Today, we are going to be taking a look at a cultural competence type of LCSW test prep question in honor of Filipino American History Month. So, October is Filipino American History Month. Hello and welcome back to my channel, Mental Health with Melissa. I'm Melissa. If you're new here, please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. I post new videos every single Sunday and Wednesday, and subscribing to my channel really helps me get mental health information out to our communities of color, including tons of free LCSW test prep information and LCSW test prep questions. I am a psychotherapist, LCSW clinical supervisor, and PhD psychology research student. Very briefly, before we get into the content of this video, I just wanted to remind y'all that I have started a mental health behavioral health provider support group on Mondays at 6 p.m. Please email me at talkitout.withmelissa@gmail.com if you're interested in learning more. We had our very first group on Monday and it was very nice. Today, we are going to be taking a look at a cultural competence type of LCSW test prep question in honor of Filipino American History Month. So October is Filipino American History Month, and I definitely want to get into some historical components of Filipino American history, being a Filipina American myself. And I think it's very important because Filipino American history is not taught in American schools, and I want to make sure that we get a chance to take a look at some of those historical components and influences of Filipinos and Filipino Americans. And we'll go ahead and start off with a cultural competence type of question, a cultural competence / family systems question, and then I'm going to give some information about some of the history of Filipino Americans and kind of the history of what started the large population of immigration to the US from the Philippines. So let's go ahead and get right into it. So we're going to take a look at this test prep question first, and then afterwards, please stay tuned because I have some really important history about Filipinos and Filipino Americans. So if you're new here, please pause, read this vignette and answer the question, and then play and then compare your answer to my answer and the rationale to see where you're at in terms of your test taking abilities. Okay, a family presents to a family therapy social worker after being referred to the children by the children's high school for resources. The mother and father identify as Filipino and immigrated to the US in their 20s. Both parents became nurses, and shortly thereafter, they had 2 children who were born and raised in the US. Neither have been to the Philippines. The son is 14 and the daughter is 17. During the initial intake, the daughter states her parents won't allow her to pursue cosmetology school and will only help with paying for medical or nursing school as they sacrifice poverty to get to America. What is the best response from a therapist? All right, so there's a lot of information here. Don't forget to break down the vignette because, again, the answer a lot of the time is in the vignette or the question. So this is a family systems / cultural competence question, and we can see that because there's a family therapist that's involved. There are Filipino immigrants, and it looks like there's maybe a dual cultures kind of taking play here for the children of Filipino immigrants, and the children are Filipino Americans. So I wonder how much assimilation has taken place. Neither have been to the Philippines. And in addition to that, both of the parents are nurses and they only want the kids to go to medical or nursing school. And there was poverty that they experienced prior to coming to America. So let's go ahead and take a look at the options. Option A, allow the parents to share their, remember, best is a very key component. all of the answers may fit into things that you may do, but what is the best response for this particular scenario? Okay, option A, allow the parents to share their history immigrating to the US and allow the daughter to share what cosmetology school means to her. Option B, inquire what Filipino culture is like and how the family can connect to Filipino roots. Option C, explain that culture is different for everyone, including within the family unit. And option D, conduct a needs assessment and refer as appropriate to different programs. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually go through this backwards. Option D, conduct a needs assessment and refer as appropriate to different programs. So it looks like the family was referred by the kids' high school for resources. So this certainly seems like an important step to take while working with the family. However, considering what is going on here and the presenting issues that came up when they presented during the intake, i.e., the daughter wants to go to cosmetology school, the Filipino parents strictly state that they don't want to pay for that, that they only want to pay for medical or nursing school, and they experience poverty before coming to America. This seems like maybe something that can be done, however, not at this time because of other things that have come up. Option C, explain that culture is different for everyone, including the family unit. So this sounds like a psychoeducational piece. However, if we're just meeting the family, we definitely want to make sure that we can gain rapport. And sometimes explaining, so kind of this is a key word here, explaining about culture when we may not even know about the culture, that may be a little bit challenging for the family to hear, and they just may want somebody to hear them out before being explained to. So because of that, that's not going to be our answer. Option B, inquire what Filipino culture is like and how the family can connect to Filipino roots. So this seems like a very important piece because you want to hear and ask what their culture is like for each person in the family member, and if it is important to them connecting to those Filipino roots. However, this is kind of making a presumption that they do want to connect to the Filipino roots, and we're being presumptuous in that this is the main concern, but we don't know that yet. So because of that, that's not going to be the answer. So via process of elimination, option A looks like is the only thing left, so that would be our answer, which is allow the parents to share their history immigrating to the US and allow the daughter to share what cosmetology school means to her. So this may be the best response at this time because it sounds like there's a lot going on here. The parents briefly mentioned that they sacrificed, a lot. And they left poverty to get to America. And so there's a lot of stuff going on. Oh, I'm sorry. This is a typo. Sacrificed a lot and leaving poverty. So that probably didn't make sense. So they sacrificed a lot and they left their homeland, they left poverty. So there's a lot going on there. So I'm curious to know if the parents have been able to share that. And it sounds like they are starting to share it. So exploring that and allowing the daughter also to share what her schooling means to her as well. So this is going to be the answer because you're allowing everyone to kind of share what these conflicting things mean to them. All right, so now that we have been able to get some information about cultural competence / family systems type of questions out there, I want to go into a little bit of history about Filipino Americans. So let's start with the very first Filipinos that were found to have settled in America. So 1587 was when there were the first accounts of Filipinos who were able to get on ships, who jumped ships and swam to shore, and were found to have traces back to St. Malo in 1763, which was in Louisiana, among other parts of the U.S. In 1898, the Philippines went to war with Spain because, as many of you probably already know, um, the country Spain had rule over the Philippines for many, many years. And so the Philippines really wanted to claim own their own independence away from Spain. And during that same time in 1898, the Philippine-American War was raised because the U.S. wanted to colonize the Philippines, and the Philippines was still getting over the fact of wanting to reclaim its country away from Spain. So you can already see that there's this history of Filipinos really trying to separate themselves and not be under any sort of dominant rule. And then during that same time in 1898, General Jacob H. Smith placed an order to kill every Filipino boy over the age of 10 years old in America. So this is like the very most prominent and blatant history that we see of Americans in the U.S. really enforcing the massive murder of Filipinos in the U.S. So, and then in 1904, there was the very well-known St. Louis World Fair, and during this time, Caucasian Americans took Filipinos and used them as like some of their main acts and put them in cages. So very disturbing. And then in 1906, there was a very large source of Filipinos that emigrated to the U.S. To Hawaii to be cheap laborers, basically, and work in sugar plantations. In the 1920s, that number of immigrants from the Philippines to the U.S., particularly on the West Coast and Hawaii, were the number increased significantly because Filipino laborers really contributed a lot to the agricultural history of America, and they were really paid cheap labor. And as a result of all of the Filipino immigrants coming to the U.S., there was a lot of racial hostility. So in 1934, there was an act that restricted a lot of that major immigration of Filipinos to the U.S. Then in World War II, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor and also the Philippines, and that's one part of history when we talk about World War II and what happened in Pearl Harbor. We don't really hear about that happening to the Philippines, and so the Filipinos were also very much affected by World War II. And during this time, President Roosevelt enlisted several Filipinos to join the service and the military, the American military, and that's when Filipinos there was a huge admission rate of Filipinos into the U.S. military, the most in the Far East. So Filipinos were promised citizenship during this time. However, for their enlistment. However, in 1946, something called the Rescission Act broke that promise. And at one point, there were actually more Filipinos in the U.S. Navy than in the Filipino Navy, which is a really interesting sort of fact. So then in 1965, the Immigration Act allowed immigration, and in the 1980s doubled the immigration of Filipinos to America, and there was a huge influx of Filipino professionals that came into the workforce, and we see that a lot with nurses. And then in the 1960s, Filipinos like Larry Itolong, farm workers, really teamed up with Chicano and Black Power movement, including teaming up with Cesar Chavez. And when we think about these household names like Cesar Chavez, we don't really think about Larry Itolong farm workers that were Filipino Americans or Filipinos. And so it's really important to kind of take a look at this information. And I want to get into some of the information about Filipino nurses, because we do have a huge population of Filipino nurses. There is this Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, and this caused an influx of foreign-born nurses to the U.S., including those from the Philippines who were helping to fill the critical shortage of nurses right after World War II ended. So actually, Filipino nurses who had immigrated to the U.S. Had done so a lot during the 1960s. And this was done during what was called an exchange visitor program that was created in 1948 to bring people from other countries to the U.S. where they could work and study for 2 years and learn about American culture. So the program didn't specifically target the Philippines or nurses, but it created it was created to combat Soviet propaganda during the Cold War by exposing foreigners to U.S. democracy. But as a result, Filipino exchange nurses and other healthcare workers soon began to dominate the program. And it turns out that the Philippines became a U.S. colony in 1898, and the U.S. implemented American nursing programs in the Philippines. And this Americanized nursing curriculum inadvertently prepared them to work in the United States, and they were trained oftentimes in English instruction. And so that's why we have this really huge population of Filipino nurses that were able to immigrate here from the Philippines. And so actually, I'm reading all of this information from an article by Anne Bryce in the Berkeley News, and I'm going to copy and paste her link here so you can check it out, because it's a very informative article. It was written in 2019, so definitely, if you get the chance to check it out, again, I'm posting it right here, so feel free to click on that. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. Until next time, managing mental health matters.